for inviting me. So the talk is about the neuroimaging in neonates. So on the last session before the break, I hope we'll finish on time. So while mortality has declined, there has been improvement in the key drivers of infant mortality over this millennium. Attesting to the impact of newborn intensive care in reducing mortality in high-risk newborn. However, there is still high prevalence of disability that found on the survivors from the survivor of neonate in the intensive care, and mostly it's related to brain injury. So the brain disorders, it's a wide chapter in neonate, and we'll talk about mainly hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy and its main mimickers or differential. Sometimes there is an overlap in the disorders, and most of the time the clinical presentation is non-specific or it's similar. So that's highlight the role of the neuroimaging. Brain imaging is an important step in the diagnosis and management of sick neonates presenting with encephalopathy, seizure, apnea, or other disorders. So neuroimaging will help to define the underlying diagnosis, to determine the management, and also to predict the prognosis of those children. What type of neuroimaging we'll use? We'll talk about ultrasound, MRI, and definitely the CT scan. So cranial ultrasound or sonography is an important part of care in the neonate, particularly in the high-risk and unstable premature infants. Usually the most common indications are to detect intracranial hemorrhage, ventriculomegaly, ischemia, and the form of periventricular leukomalacia mainly. Other disorder can be detected by ultrasound, however, it's usually not specific findings. The advantage of ultrasound, of course, is non-invasive, easy, no need for sedation, it's fast on the bedside, it's cheap, there is no radiation, so basically it is safe, and feasibility of serial or follow-up examination. It can show calcification, but it's definitely very sensitive for hemorrhage and sometimes periventricular encephalomalacia and definitely hydrocephalus. So the problem with ultrasound is that it's operator dependent. So whoever doing the ultrasound need to know how to do it and how to interpret the imaging. Sometimes it has a small field of view, which is the acoustic window, especially in the term newborn. It's less sensitive, of course, in detecting the contrast of soft tissues in comparison to the MRI, for example. So it's hard to detect the pattern of gyration, posterior fossa anomalies, and if there is certain changes in the parenchyma. So if we need more detailed finding, or we have not clear clinical presentation in the newborn, we need to go for more advanced imaging. So it's usually is the initial study, and if there's lack of concordance with clinical, MR should be considered. So those are some ultrasound images. We can see that hydrocephalus is easy to be detected by ultrasound. So I don't know if it's working with the. Okay. So I just wanted to show that the hydrocephalus is easy to be detected by the ultrasound, hemorrhage, as well. There is in some cases the images in the middle. So I put here and it will appear there. Okay. So yeah, so hydrocephalus is easy to be detected by ultrasound, as you can see on these images. This ultrasound, it shows the intraventricular hemorrhage. That's almost grade 2 intraventricular hemorrhage. This patient have traumatic birth injury, and we can see that there is a large extra-axial or subdural collection that can be detected by ultrasound. And also the ultrasound, we can detect that there's this cystic structure that turned to be vein of Gallimard formation. So ultrasound can be really helpful, especially in early or initial evaluation. Coronary ultrasound in the preterm. So there's no universally accepted protocol for ultrasound or screening ultrasound for the head in the preterm. And the only report that I found was from 2002, and it said routine screening cranial ultrasonography should be performed on all infants of 30 weeks gestation once between 7 and 14 days of age, and should be optimally repeated between 36 and 40 weeks post-menstrual age. Well, I believe that in most centers, the head ultrasound should be done in the first week after birth, and some centers they repeat it every week. In our center, we do it every 2 weeks, unless there is a new incident or more urgent need. MRI is, of course, the most sensitive and specific imaging technique for examining the infant or the newborn brain with suspected hypoxic ischemic brain injury or any other problems. Advantage of MRI, it's superior. It has a superior soft tissue contrast. It shows details of the brain. You can see the cortex, the white matter. We can detect the stage of maturation, the myelination. It helps in early diagnosis of parenchymal insult. We can see details of the posterior fossa. Of course, you can also see different planes, variable field of view, higher imaging techniques as MR spectroscopy, diffusion, ASL, and other. The difficulty of MRI is that this newborn needs to be stable. There should be a transport team to transfer the patient to the MRI department. Mostly it needs sedation. The newborn needs not to move to get good images. And of course, it's of high cost. So as we said, among imaging modality, magnetic resonance is the important tool. It can detect the early changes of the normal development and of the disorders. That's an MRI of a newborn who presented with seizures. We can see how nice the details of the cortex and white matter basal, the basal nuclei, and there is a bilateral subependymal lesions as seen in low in T2, high in T1 that turn to be calcification. The child diagnosed as tuberous sclerosis. So I skipped CT scan, not really skipping, just there is a special concerns about the CT scan, which is the radiation risk. So CT scan will give images through ionizing radiation. Ionizing radiation, the CT scan can deliver around 100 to 15 times the radiation of a single radiograph or X-ray. So it is a large amount of radiation per scan. So the concerns is that children or babies are more sensitive, and this radiation can induce tumors, especially that we expect long years of survival. The most common tumor that's related to radiation are leukemia because of the affection of the bone marrow and the brain tumors. However, we're not talking about a single exam, we're talking about the accumulative effect of radiation. So if we need to do a CT scan, we can do it with proper technique and in certain situations. The second problem with the CT scan, that is the intrinsic features of the neonatal brain. So the neonatal brain have a large amount of fluid. So in the images in the CT scan, we can hardly identify the cortex and white matter, especially if we are using the low-dose protocol to protect the brain from the ionizing radiation. So we can see that this patient have an ultrasound that shows hydrocephalus and the CT shows hydrocephalus and did not show the other findings. So to do CT scan, we should have a good justification and optimization of this study. Justification, it means that we should do the exam in a certain situation that CT can help in the diagnosis, especially like trauma. If we want to check hemorrhage calcification, if the patient not stable enough to go to the MRI, we cannot give sedation if there is contraindication to MRI or for sedation, or if there is no availability of MRI. Optimization means we have to tailor the exam, the CT scan, to fit the patient age and size, and that's what we are doing with all pediatric age group. So what the indication of neuroimaging in the neonate encephalopathy, for sure, is the first most important presentation or indication. Seizures, unexplained apnea, infections, metabolic disorders. In case of birth injury, if we want to check the further the brain insult, and in case of structural brain abnormalities. So we'll talk about hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy in brief, term and preterm, and the mimickers of encephalopathy or other differential of hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. So hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy or birth that is result from birth asphyxia is the main indication of neonatal brain neuroimaging because of possible severe neurological complication that they already talked about in the early lectures in this session. Moderate to severe encephalopathy of asphyxia origin represent 2.9 per thousand delivery, while neonatal encephalopathy, whatever, is caused by 3.8 per thousand. So the main cause of neonatal encephalopathy is the HIE. Incidence of HIE is 0.4% in term, and it's much higher, like 18% in preterm, according to the source. So imaging findings are variable in the hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. It depends on the stage of brain maturity, term or preterm, depending on the severity of the hypoxia or the hypotension, the duration of the insult, and the type and timing of the imaging studies. Early imaging finding can be subtle and can be overlooked, so the right timing is very essential in the scan. They divided into preterm and term findings. In the preterm, we'll talk about IVH, mild or moderate to severe hypoxia, and in the term mild to moderate hypoxia, related HIE, and profound hypoxia. IVH prevalence is inversely related to the gestational age and to the birth weight. So the younger the smaller the gestational age, the lower the birth weight, the higher incidence of the intraventricular hemorrhage. 40% have their onset within 5 hours of birth and 90% within the first 4 days. And of course, it's higher incidence if there is already other cofactors in the neonate. The classification of intraventricular hemorrhage or germinal matrix hemorrhage, as you know, is 4 grades. We start from the simple germinal matrix hemorrhage. then intraventricular hemorrhage, but no ventriculomegaly. Grade 3 with ventriculomegaly. Grade 4 is parenchymal hematoma or hemorrhage that's not necessarily related to the intraventricular hemorrhage. However, it's actually related to venous infarction, but it's classified as grade 4. This ultrasound, you can see that there is high echoic, echogenic area, the area of the caudothalamic groove. That's a grade 1 germinal matrix hemorrhage. The patient have an MRI. We can see that it's very sensitive to detect the tiny hemorrhagic spot as seen in the right side, I think with the arrow. That's a grade 3 intraventricular hemorrhage. The patient have bilateral intraventricular hematomas. There is intraventricular hematomas bilaterally, and there's already hydrocephalus. And that's a grade 3 IVH. That's a grade 4 with hydrocephalus, intraventricular hemorrhage, and large periventricular hemorrhage. That's another patient with bilateral intraventricular hemorrhage. That's almost grade 3. Just I wanted to show that the posterior fossa. That there is also intraventricular hemorrhage can happen in the posterior fossa and on the surface of the brain. So germinal matrix and the cerebellum is on the surface of the cerebellum, and it's all usually associated with poor prognosis. I will talk about the periventricular leukomalacia or hypoxic ischemic insult of the preterm brain. So it's divided into mild to moderate hypoxia related or profound hypoxia. So periventricular leukomalacia basically is the mild to moderate form of HIE in the preterm, usually located in the watershed zone. So watershed zone in the preterm will be in the frontal periventricular area, close to the frontal horns, or in the periventricular peritrigonal region. Imaging modality for diagnosis and follow-up include head ultrasound and MR is crucial. The periventricular, that's an ultrasound, shows periventricular leukomalacia. You can see the echogenicity around the frontal horn of the lateral ventricles. There is tiny hypoechoic area that's related to early cystic changes. In the preterm, also periventricular leukomalacia can appear in a subtle or mild to moderate form. And this patient, the MRI showed that there is bilateral peritrigonal foci of abnormal signal intensity. You can see it in the T1 and the T2 with diffusion restriction. Chronic or consequences of PVL or periventricular leukomalacia, that's how it would appear later in life. So in this patient is already 5 years old. We can see that there is significant loss or paucity of the periventricular white matter, undulating outline or irregular outline of the lateral ventricles, no evidence of gliosis. Probably this insult happened before the 28 to 30 weeks, at the time of the immaturity of the brain that not allow gliosis formation. A profound hypoxic ischemic insult in a preterm, we don't usually image it. Most of the time this patient will be unstable and sick in the ICU. So if we have the scan, we'll see that the basal ganglia and thalami are mostly affected. In term newborn with hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy, again, it's the major cause of death and neurodevelopmental disability in the term newborn, and however, prevalence is declining. The prevalence of HII is estimated to be 2 to 4 per 1,000 live term birth, and from those, 25% will develop permanent neurological deficit. So it's a major cause of CP. Early neuroimaging is important, however, the right timing is important as well. So very early imaging we can overlook the findings. However, the peak MR imaging in the HIE cases, it's about around the third or fifth day, or after the rewarming, after the head cooling. So the best time in the case of HIE in term infant to do the MRI at day 4 or 5 of days after birth. So that to facilitate better recognition of the changes of the hypoxic ischemic insult or ischemia, and also of course to give good counseling to the parents and their infant's prognosis about the potential outcome, and of course guiding the decision about the care. We can repeat the MRI at the day 10 or 14 if the images on the clinical features are discordant, or where there is diagnostic ambiguity persistent, or if we are not reaching the proper diagnosis. So in turn, we'll talk about mild moderate hypoxia related to HIE and profound hypoxia. So in the after the event of mild or moderate hypoxia or hypotension, the affected area in the term newborn brain will be also the watershed area. So watershed area in the term will be at around the area of the distribution of the major arteries. I mean between ACA, MCA, or between MCA, PCA, and along the parasagittal region. So that's a term newborn who suffered from moderate hypoxia. The MRI will, or the conventional images of the MRI, the T1 and the T2 show no significant changes. In the diffusion weighted images, we can see that there is bilateral, mainly cortical, subcortical, cytotoxic edema or infarction-like changes, as seen in the bilateral frontal and in the right occipital area. That's another patient. This patient have a profound hypoxia event, and the affected area with the profound ischemia will be mostly at the basal ganglia, or especially posterior aspect of the putamina, ventrolateral thalami, hippocampi, dorsal brainstem, corticospinal tracts, and periodontic cortex, and more involved, which is the sensory motor cortex. So why those areas are specifically more affected? Because they are the actively myelinating region where there's energy-intensive process, or it will contain highest concentration of NMDA receptors or the glutamate sensitive cells. Hence, with the profound hypoxia, it will be suffered more from ischemia, and then we'll see these changes in the MRI. So in the images, we can see that there is bilateral thalami, basal ganglia, abnormal diffusion restriction. We'll see it as high signal in the diffusion, low in the ADC map, with obvious edema and abnormal high signal intensity in the T2 weighted images. Another patient with really devastating changes. So those are T2 weighted images, shows the significant loss of the cortex white matter interface with severe edema bilaterally, involving the bilateral hemisphere, parenchyma, and the thalami and the basal ganglia. And the diffusion, we can see the involvement of the bilateral thalami, basal ganglia, perirolantic cortex. We can see the changes along the corticospinal tracts, So we can see the bilateral hippocampal involvement and the brainstem involvement. So we know as the ADC map or the diffusion and the spectroscopy is very sensitive. So the lower the ADC map, the ADC signal intensity, the worse the prognosis. That means the brain is more affected, and as well as the MR spectroscopy, the higher the lactate to NAA ratio means there is high lactate in the parenchyma, which indicate necrosis. Will predict also worse prognosis. Chronic hypoxic ischemic injury in a term newborn will look like this. You can see that areas of bad cystic changes in the parenchyma, loss of volume, olguria, we call it, as like mushroom-like cortex. In this patient, there is an extensive bilateral cystic encephalomalacia of the parenchyma, basal ganglia, and thalami, with loss of volume and extraaxial CSF fluid collection. What the differential diagnosis of neonatal encephalopathy? We'll have a look at some images at severe birth trauma, neonatal stroke, infections, congenital infections, metabolic encephalopathy, and congenital malformations. So that's a newborn with abnormal movement, no history of birth asphyxia. We can see that there is left side diffusion restriction in the distribution of middle cerebral artery. That was a neonatal stroke. So a perinatal stroke can be arterial or venous. There is 90% of cases there is no identified cause, and of course diffusion can show, as in this image, that there is the MCA distribution, and we can see that there is edema along the corticospinal tracts that we call Mullerian degeneration. That predict that might be congenital hemiparesis. Okay. The neonatal hypoglycemia on MRI, we will see that there is a specific involvement of the occipital lobe bilaterally, as well as the posterior part of the corpus callosum. Traumatic brain injury, usually when traumatic brain injury are either related to birth or not. Ultrasound can detect the hemorrhage. However, CT scan is the modality of choice if we want to detect the bone fracture, the diastasis, the hemorrhage, as well as the parenchymal or extraaxial hemorrhage, as in this patient. In MRI also we can see if there is parenchymal injury, or if there is related dural venous sinus thrombosis or venous infarction or hemorrhage. In this patient you can see that there is fracture of the temporal bone. There is subpial hematoma that can be detected by detected by ultrasound. You can see it in the CT scan very clear, also of course in the MRI. Neonatal infections can impede cerebral maturation, of course, and can lead to neurodevelopmental delay. This patient is 8 days old with lethargy, poor feeding, irritability, and sepsis. The MRI ultrasound shows mild brain edema, but no specific changes. The MRI shows there is an extensive bilateral brain edema, loss of gray-white matter differentiation. The diffusion shows an extensive changes involving bilateral frontal, parietal, and part of the occipital lobes. The post-contrast images shows the thickening enhancement of the leptomeninges. There is also subdural collections that shows diffusion restriction that's consistent with pain. So this patient have a group B streptococcus meningitis that is usually complicated with cerebritis, vasculitis, ventriculitis, subdural effusion or empyema, and can lead lead to arterial and venous infarction as in this patient. Neonatal encephalitis also can cause an encephalopathy. This patient have human herpes virus 2 infection, and it has a devastating sequela as severe cystic encephalomalacia related to severe cerebritis and brain tissue necrosis. Varicovirus infection also is it can affect the brain newborn because it has a special effect on an inflammatory cytokine that can be toxic to pre-myelinating oligodendrocytes and the developing axons. So we can see from the images that especially involve the white matter tracts in the supratentorial and infratentorial brain. Congenital infection like CNV, you can see the microcephaly and the calcification that can be detected by ultrasound, CT scan, of course, by MRI. MRI also will show the cortical malformation that is usually related to early infection by CNV. We have gone through a dengue fever case, and the mother infected with dengue fever early in pregnancy, and so the child will get microcephaly, extensive brain damage, and post-birth MRI also shows the poor cortical development, microcephaly, cystic changes, severely damaged brain. Metabolic encephalopathy can be challenging in the diagnosis. There is an overlap with the HIE, however, there is red flags, as the doctor said, that can lead to an early images. Usually it's an inborn error of metabolism that will be presented in the neonatal period. So some of the early presenting metabolic brain disease in the newborn, like pyruvate dehydrogenase complex deficiency, it can present early in the neonatal period. It can show distorted lateral ventricles with internal septations and abnormal signal intensity and sometimes calcification. Actually, if the patient have an early scan, like an ultrasound, antenatal scan, and fetal MRI, it can also show the brain already affected. Isolated sulfide oxidase deficiency also is a devastating autosomal recessive neurometabolic disease. Patient will, yes, let's finish this case. Seizure, feeding difficulties, and vomiting. Its main differential is molybdenum cofactor deficiency. It's the main mimicker of the HIE because of the extensive involvement of the cortex and the basal ganglia. However, it's usually sparing the thalami. Okay, thank you. I think the time is up.